I'd like to talk for a minute about the new low sulfur diesel that was legislated by the Clean Air Act of 1990. The Environmental Protection Agency directed a 90% reduction in the sulfur content of diesel fuel. And this has caused enormous operability problems for the fleet operator today. In fact, it is so severe that many manufacturers are actually voiding warranties for the use of low sulfur diesel. Some of the ones that have had real problems are Cummins, Caterpillar, Bosch fuel injection systems, Stanadyne, John Deere equipment, and many, many others. Those are just to name a few. The low sulfur diesel, essentially what happens through a hydrotreating process, sulfur is removed from the diesel fuel, which actually has some very significant changes to the fuel itself. Number one, it removes the lubricity. Diesel itself used to be a very oily fuel, and now the lubricity is pretty much gone. It chemically changes the aromatics, so that causes more severe wear on your rubber O-rings, and there's a higher paraffin content in the diesel fuel itself. The effects of the low lubricity are that it burns very dry like kerosene. Kerosene itself is a very dry fuel. In fact, fleet operators using it help facilitate cold weather operations because kerosene will actually have a plug point down around -60 degrees, have found that by the end of the winter, their engine's almost a meltdown. Injectors are worn out. There's been hard part damage to cylinder liners, to pistons, and to the combustion chamber itself. Also, on the lower exhaust valve guides, those are badly worn, the valve seats and the cylinder liners. And the injectors have a plunger that goes back and forth over 32,000 pounds per square inch of pressure being forced by the plunger. And without lubrication, it creates excessive wear on the injectors and the pumps. Now, the effects of high paraffin content are that, first of all, that the paraffin is very unstable in the fuel. So sludging occurs prematurely. In fact, as the sludge forms, that heavier end falls out of solution, and that is a further loss of BTUs. In addition to the fact that because we've removed the sulfur, we've already lost 14,000 BTUs of performance, which is like a 10% loss over high sulfur diesel. And that shows up in a half a mile to mile per gallon loss in mileage. It'll show up in poor performance, dropping 1 and 2 gears to pull a hill in a truck. But the algae feeds on that wax, so it's more problematic than it ever used to be. We found that the fuels gel at much higher temperatures, 2 to 3 degrees lower than the cloud point. In fact, the fuel will actually gel at temperatures from 2 degrees to almost 20 degrees Fahrenheit above zero. And in fact, when driving down a hill, a 1 degree drop in temperature could actually cause that filter to totally plug, and that truck's going nowhere. It's off the side of the road. So anti-gel technology is very effective with low sulfur diesel. Lubrication. Lubrication is a very important ingredient in Dee-Zol and is specifically added for the low sulfur diesel fuels. It protects the injectors. In fact, as we said before, the injector has a plunger that moves back and forth under a very high pressure, and it lubricates that injector so you don't get hard wear inside the injector and the pump itself. It also protects the rubber O-rings. We saw some examples of O-rings in this jar before. Those things the O-rings will shrink about 3% in less than a month, and our product keeps those shrinkage from occurring. On the throttle rod and the throttle shaft assembly, the lubricating properties of the diesel fuel will prevent that rubber O-ring from becoming very brittle. It keeps it nice and elastic so it doesn't fail. Without the use of our additive, that O-ring gets hard and brittle, it shrinks, and the fuel will just gush out the side of the pump like a high pressure hose. So the lubricating properties then will protect the top cylinder area, the valves,